All right, hey guys. In this one, we're going to talk about weight loss dieting and how that works, and specifically beyond that, what you might run into and what kind of problems might arise from that. So, let's kind of lay the groundwork first about how weight loss occurs and how we might diet for that. First and foremost, the biggest lever that you can pull is going to be creating a calorie deficit. You can't violate the thermodynamics or the law of thermodynamics. You have to eat less energy than what you're burning, essentially, than what you're outputting. Calories in versus calories out, it wins every time. People kind of get a little bit upset about it because there's different things that go on under the hood that might influence how many calories you're specifically absorbing, able to use, etc., hormonal stuff. But that doesn't change the fact that the amount of energy your body takes in and uses versus the amount of energy you output dictates your weight balance. What you do in the gym and your macronutrient intake also dictates what that is composed of, but specifically from a scale number, calories in versus calories out is going to win every single time. So if you're not losing weight, drop the calories. And that's going to work 9 times out of 10. Now, it gets much more nuanced with that in terms of what we do with body composition, how we do adherence, how we do athletic performance, etc. So get your calories correct, and we'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit. How you actually determine your calories specifically, there's a couple options. A good rough heuristic, if you're moderately active, is take your body weight and times it by 14. That might be a good place to set your cutting calories. It's really rough, but it's a good starting point. And then what you can do from there is measure your calories over the course of a couple weeks and track your body weight across time. You average out your calories and you see those spikes and dips of your weight, but then you look at the trend line, you say, oh, I've roughly averaged a half pound of weight loss per week over the course of 2 weeks. That tells you you're in roughly a 25 or 250 calorie deficit. We know this because roughly 3,500 calories equates to the energy requirement for a pound of body fat or a pound of tissue. So 500 calories a day adds up over 7 days to be 3,500 calories. So that would roughly lose you a pound a week if you cut 500 calories from your diet. So if you're losing a half pound a week, you know that you've essentially been in a 250 calorie deficit. So there's that. Next, depends on your sport. If you are a strength-based athlete or a physique-based athlete or a sport that doesn't require a ton of endurance, protein is going to be your next consideration. Depending on your need for muscle mass, you can go all the way up to 1 gram per pound of body weight. I'm going to say this in freedom units, or 1.2 grams per pound of body weight. If you're more on the endurance side or you have just a lot of volume that your sport requires, you can drop that down to 0.8 grams per pound of body weight, because even if you're an endurance athlete, you likely don't want to risk atrophy from all the work that you're doing too. The next most important consideration is going to be carbohydrates, and that's in order of importance, but we're actually going to talk about how we determine how much we're taking in last. The next consideration you have is going to be fats. Oftentimes you can set fats at roughly a minimum effective dose to maintain a hormonal profile, or you can give athletes somewhat of a range. More often than not, somewhere between 40 to 80 grams is going to be a sufficient amount of fat for most people. Again, there's a body weight spectrum here, but let's just say 40 to 80 grams from here. If you're a more endurance-based athlete and you find that you function well on lower fats, that's very beneficial because it allows you to give the rest of your calories essentially to be carbohydrates. If you're a less endurance-based athlete or you find that you need a little bit more fat in your diet, either for enjoyment or function, you can bump those up and just know that it is going to come from carbohydrates a little bit. So it's kind of a balancing act. I'm currently working with an endurance-based athlete right now. We have him on 0.8 grams per pound of body weight protein, 40 grams of fat, and then the rest of his 3,200 calorie diet is coming from carbohydrate. So it's a lot of carbohydrate. Nested within that, especially on the endurance side, it is very, very difficult to get the calories in that you need to meet the demand of your sport if you're only eating the most satiating, most healthy option. So don't be afraid, if you're having a problem actually hitting your calorie number, to gradually turn down the quote-unquote cleanness of your diet. If you're having roughly 80% of your diet be from whole healthy sources, like if you could ask a 5-year-old, is this meal healthy? And they say it's healthy, you're checking a lot of boxes. Beyond that, after you've kind of got those things in line for sport performance, the next thing that's going to matter is food quality. If you're constantly having only simple sugars ever, this can lead to a lot of spikes and dips in blood sugar at inopportune times, whereas you might be looking for more of a slower drip of carbohydrate and protein, etc. So there's the health aspect of the food, but also if you're only taking in the most palatable, most highly processed foods, sometimes it can really ramp you up and then really crash you afterwards. So you kind of need to have a balance there. There absolutely is time in sport performance where you want the quickest amount of carbohydrate and sugar in your system as possible. But there is also a lot of instances where you want to have a little bit more of a moderate GI or digestion profile. So you're getting kind of like a steady drip of carbohydrates into the system. So know that. For fat loss dieting specifically, food satiety is going to be one of the most important things you can do. Some really awesome options for satiety are going to be fiber. Fiber, because there's not a lot of fats involved because you're actually not digesting it. There's soluble and insoluble. Not really super relevant to this conversation, but improving fiber and making sure your GI can undertake it is going to be a nice way to make sure you're staying nice and full while losing body fat. Another way that helps with satiety, at least in the short term, is going to be fat intake. It slows digestion a little bit. So you probably don't want to have fat around your competitions because it might slow digestion too much. And fat also isn't super useful in weight loss dieting because there's a lot of calories involved with the intake of fat. So not beyond the minimum effective dose and things functioning properly, fat doesn't get a lot of love on this side of the sporting equation. That's not to say it's a problem. You need to get the amount that makes your body kind of run on all cylinders. But beyond that, you don't get the added benefits that you would, for instance, if you were adding carbohydrate. So when you go into a conversation about weight loss dieting, the most precise way you can do it is to track calories and monitor body weight and reference both of those, tweaking as you go. You need to be paying attention to body weight as well as performance, and then below that, mood, sleep, brain fuzz, as I like to call it, are all relevant things to understand. So the reason performance is so important is because if you are matching or beating or improving in some type of measurable physiological performative measure, by definition you are recovering, because you can't have positive adaptations if you can't first recover. So if your performance is going up, that's a huge green flag. If the weight's going down, that's a huge green flag. Sometimes those will interact negatively with each other, meaning the best you can do on a fat loss phase is maintain your performance, which is a good indicator you're roughly holding on to a lot of your muscle, because muscle loss is somewhat of an issue if you are losing a significant amount of weight, body fat specifically. Especially if you're already really lean, let's say you're getting on a bodybuilding stage, your body doesn't want to keep that muscle around as much as it wants to keep some required amount of fat to keep you alive. Your body does a really good job evolutionarily of keeping you alive, or trying to. And then mood, sleep, and brain fuzz, as I like to call it, brain function. Those are all just kind of secondary measures that are telling you, have I really aggressively undershot calories? Am I not able to actually function in life? Those can be problems too. From there, you watch the trend line go down, you check on performance, and then once something starts to plateau or go off the rails there, you know you need to make an adjustment. You can do that by either changing the food side of the equation or changing the output side of the equation. A really awesome way that I like to think about this, or ask clients, if you had to pick, would you rather eat a little less or move a little more? What sounds the least bad to you? And they'll more often than not have a very aggressive and quick, they'll know which one's the lesser of the two evils. And then you just give them that, and then you repeat. You watch that weight go down, and you're chilling. A few notes there. It's probably not the best idea to fat loss diet indefinitely, because there's an accumulated fatigue aspect of it. A good rule of thumb is if you've lost 10% of your body weight, potentially pull back and do a maintenance phase, so that you're not constantly taxing that mental, constantly eating in a calorie deficit, putting all that stress on your body. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but high stress can be a problem for maintaining muscle mass too, so we got to watch out for that. Some problems that can either interfere or be causal, or caused by prolonged caloric dieting, caloric deficit, you could have problems with sleep. So if you're in a constant caloric deficit, that's stressful. Those stress hormones, think like cortisol, etc., can really interfere with sleep onset and sleep quality. So if you're getting sleep degradation, that might be a sign you've dieted for too long, too aggressively, or you are very, very lean already, in which case you're making a calculated decision. Furthermore, if you're not sleeping, that can make you less likely to lose body fat and more likely to lose muscle mass. So it's just the first level of fat loss dieting in sport performance is going to be get your sleep right. That's like step one. If your client's not losing weight, there's also a possibility that there's a tracking error. Tracking food or remembering to track all your food is a very, very common issue. So you might want to start troubleshooting that with clients that their weight is not going down because they're not telling you about the handful of nuts that they're taking in 3 different times across the day because it's quote unquote healthy food, not realizing that adds up to 400 calories and they can't figure out why they lose weight. We already talked about stress, caffeine abuse. So caffeine, as you continue to increase the dose, can cause, again, an increase in stress hormones, but also it can start to impact your sleep. So you're more stressed when you're awake because of all the caffeine, but also you're so tired. So it's like a double-edged sword, making you more and more tired. So you need more and more caffeine. Your sleep gets worse and worse. This is just a super terrible option for health in general, but also fat loss. So understand when to add in caffeine to a diet and when to consider being at a low to no dose at all. It's a double-edged sword and you need to wield it wisely at appropriate times. Another thing that can cause a problem in fat loss dieting is going to be eating low satiety foods. So specifically, if you're drinking a lot of calories, if you're eating foods that are a ton of calories but not a ton of food and not high in fiber as an example, or just look up the food satiety index and that'll give you a really nice ranking of all how foods play out in terms of satiety. So you're eating like super quick digesting, super fun, highly palatable foods, ton of calories. You get to the end, you get to like 3 p.m. in your day, you have 100 calories left and you are starving. You are screwed in that instance. So that's a really common problem. Something that we'll get into that a little bit later. The other thing would be that can cause problems in fat loss dieting is over restriction. It's really, really common for people to just be like, oh, I'm cutting out carbohydrates. I'm doing little to no fat. I'm just cutting out all of X, Y, Z, all sugar, etc. Oftentimes, hyper-restrictive diets either lead to failure of initially losing the weight loss or an ultra big rebound. So we don't like to recommend ultra-restrictive diets on top of the fact that they're not very effective. Because you can have a little bit of that food group that you're potentially trying to completely eliminate and kind of scratch that itch and still hopefully stay to plan. There's 2 ways to deal with cravings in fat loss diet too. That's a nice transition there. The first being, I call it if someone has the Cookie Monster effect, which means the second they try one sweet treat, the lid's off the trash can and the Cookie Monster is not going back in. They're eating the whole box of Oreos. That is me. In those instances, I actually like to coach clients to stay away from starting down that sweet treat path. Consider like diet sodas, things like that, something else to scratch the itch. Eating more of your healthy meals. There are other clients that feel dieting is super restrictive and they need that sweet treat or that fun treat throughout the week to kind of get them through. You got to figure out which end of that spectrum your client's on and kind of go accordingly. Again, nutrient timing isn't a crazy important conversation to have, but if you are an athlete that has a lot of throughput, or in this instance in a calorie deficit, making sure you get a good amount of pre-workout nutrition in your system is going to be crucial so you can actually go out and perform at the thing you have to perform at. It's a little bit less important in a calorie surplus. You're naturally going to get the question about diet breaks and refeeds. You can have refeeds. There's really nothing magical about the metabolism, as people will claim, for refeeds. If every Sunday they want to eat at maintenance because they like hanging out with Gam Gam and doing, she likes watching Josh Allen, your grandma, that's perfectly fine. Just know that you're only spending 6 days in a deficit and there's nothing else magical going These are some of the more common strategies for fat loss dieting, but also some of the most common issues. So hopefully that helps in that regard. And then the last thing we'll touch on is people sometimes moralize fat loss dieting and think that like if they can't do it, they're a failure. This isn't perfect because it's very highly debated in psychological research, but willpower, at least to some degree, might be a taxable resource. Whether or not it's like finite or infinite or rechargeable, that's super debated, but you can only say no to Oreos for so long. If they're in your environment, they're going to weigh on you. So doing your best to craft your environment to not tax your willpower will set you and your clients up for an aggressive amount of success. That client has to get in the car, drive to Kroger to get the Oreos, and then sit in their car eating the Oreos watching Joe Rogan. Versus if they had them in the house, they're much more likely to just binge on the Oreos. So craft that environment and that social network, that social structure, hopefully, to make it easier to stick to the plan than it is to break from the plan. That makes executing the plan and building habits significantly easier. Hopefully that helps. And be sure to let me know if you have any more questions on this. This is kind of an introductory lesson in what fat loss dieting is, what are some common problems, and how to go about it. Hopefully it's helped.